Okay, I have several different things I could talk about. I could talk about auditing and all the programs I've done on animal welfare auditing, developing real simple auditing scoring systems for things like meat plants and farms. But what Yvonne wanted me to talk about was animal behavior. So I said, okay, I've got these different talks I can do. Why don't we talk about some animal behavior stuff? I said, okay, then that's what we're going to do. Okay, let's get into it. Now, there's a lot of people in ag that kind of say, well, you know, how could animals have emotions? That's being anthropomorphic to say that they have emotions. Now, one of the big problems that we have in science and in a lot of different things is people stay in their silos. The internet has made this worse. It's worse. Okay, you're just talking to your Facebook friends in your silo. And the research on animal emotions, it's all in the neuroscience literature. And you know what? It's been there for years. And it was done with invasive electrode experiments that you're not allowed to do today that are absolutely definitive. Because if you do an MRI, a whole network will light up when you stimulate a certain emotion, but you don't know which node on that network's the root server. Electrode studies identified that. And they identified it sometimes back in the 60s, but people don't go across the silos. Another thing I wanted to mention, before I get going any further, I loved the talk about the farm tours. You know, people want that personal connection, and that's why I asked that question about did it work better when you had the Tyson field rep there, or whether it was the family that ran the farm giving the tour. People want that personal connection. My feeling on a lot of this stuff, I think in the future, in ag, yeah, we're going to have a better large-scale commercial, like a chicken cage where the chicken can actually walk at a normal height, have a nest box, where we get rid of the sow stalls. We figure out a way to anesthetize baby pigs so they aren't screeching their heads off and you castrate them. There's some things like that we got to fix. Then once those things get fixed, we need to just be opening up the door. So I think in the future, we're going to get a large-scale commercial, a better one. I'm not going to use that buzzword factory farm, but an indoor, intensive, large-scale commercial. And then you're going to have your niche markets. And I was talking to Joy Mensch last night, and I was horrified to find out that Germany about wrecked their egg industry by making rules so strict that nobody could afford to raise chickens. That's like really stupid. You don't want to be doing that. Now, on the other hand, let's not deny that animals have emotional systems. Because I had a chance to, when I was getting my doctorate, I actually had a chance to dissect the human brain, and I had a chance to dissect a pig brain. Cut it right down like this. What separates us from the animals? A gigantic cortex, raw computer power. But then you get underneath down the emotional circuits. That's the stuff that's not really very different. And I'm going to go through some research, in fact, rather some old research, that shows that there are emotional circuits. Do animals have emotions? All right, let's just look at facts. Prozac works on dogs. There's all kinds of papers. You can go onto the PubMed database and type in OCD and dogs, and there's all kinds of studies where they're a model system. Think about all the drugs that get tested on rats and things like that. They're using them as a model system. And these brain systems for emotions are in the subcortex. And the neurotransmitters are the same. Now, there's some things that are different in different species on how things are wired. Like if I go up to Yvonne and I put my hand around her like this, that's lovey-dovey probably with Yvonne, but with a dog it's dominance. That's where they can be species differences in how things are hooked up. All right, Jack Panskep, he's been around for a long time, outlined the core emotional systems. And this is not theory here, this stuff's fact. I mean, I can pound you over the head with hundreds of journal articles, which the Physiological Society has put up online, that I was actually able to get into without my CSU library card. You're allowed a certain amount of access before the paywalls come up, which I think is really good. And some of this old stuff. You have fear. That's what motivates an animal to get away from predator. Most primitive sense. Why does the hen want that nest box? Because you want to hide when you lay your eggs so the fox won't eat you. That's probably motivated by fear. Then you have rage. Okay, the predator's killing you. What makes you fight it off? That's rage. Then you have another negative emotion, that's separation distress. The neuroscientists use the term panic. I hate that because it gets mixed up with fear. I'd rather say we have fear and we have separation distress. You know, you take the calf away from the cow, you separate the babies from the mom, you separate cattle from the other cattle, and they're throwing a big fit vocalizing because they're separated. Yeah, that's a real negative emotion, but it's not fear. You see, in the slaughter plant, I developed a vocalization scoring system for cattle. And if more than 5% of the cattle moo and vocalize in the stunning chute, they fail the McDonald's on it. It's that simple. Because almost all those moos, about 99% of them, were associated with something bad like electric prods, a broken stunner, sharp edges on a head holding device, slipping on the floor, some obviously bad thing. Now, sheep, on the other hand, is the ultimate prey species. You can torture the poor things, and they don't complain. But you get them separated from the flock, they'll ba-ba-ba-ba their heads off. But you see that separation distress. All right, now we got 3 big negative emotions up there. Well, what makes an animal go out and do stuff? That's seek. That's seek. And you probably all have seen the Labrador Retriever, this ball cuckoo, those long, skinny labs. All they want to do is chase the ball. And then there's a heavy-set lab that's content to lay next to the wheelchair, and he's a great service dog. They're both labs, but they have different amounts of seeking. You have some animals that are more high fear than other animals. And then you have, of course, sex. So if I don't want my website, busted by net nanny, I got to call it lust. Yeah, Jack Panskep likes that term. Then you got mother-young nurturing. That's the oxytocin system. And then you got play. You can cut the cortex off an animal and it'll still play. All right, let's go into some more neuroscience. All right, some nice old literature here. Definitely proves that animals have emotions. Electrical stimulation of the amygdala turns on fear. In fact, I've got a paper that reviews this literature that I did with Nancy Erlbeck and Cheryl Morris. You can look it up go on the PubMed database, type in Grandin T. You got to do it that way on PubMed. Grandin T into the PubMed database, Companion Animal Symposium. I go over this literature. I've got another paper, Assessment of Stress During Handling and Transport, where I review some of this literature because I like to bust out of the silos. And you poke that electrode down into the amygdala, it turns on fear. You'll never get it through the iacock today. You don't need to get it through the iacock. There's lots and lots of papers out there. And also, when you stimulate the amygdala, it gets all the stress hormones all stirred up. Okay, now if you destroy the amygdala, it makes an animal tame. Rats will no longer fear cats, and you wouldn't live very long out in the wild. You can just take the fear out. That was the Kluver-Bucy, that's what they call Kluver-Bucy syndrome, and that study was done in 1937. Again, hidden over in the neuroscience literature. But the thing I find is when I'm even today still writing up stuff, they'll say you can't use the fear word. That's not a scientific word. You got to say they were excited or they were agitated. But in the neuroscience literature, they'll use the fear word. It is a scientifically proper word. Okay, we're handling an animal, any animal. If you force that animal to do something, you get a lot more stress than if it does something voluntarily. Okay, so up there's cattle really rough handling. Here's cattle roughed up quite a lot during handling. And here's antelope that we trained to stand still for the privilege of getting injections and blood samples drawn from them for treats. You force it, you're going to get the fear stress. Now, if you have an animal that's high-strung genetically, you're going to get even more fear stress. There's heritability differences in fearfulness or the tendency to seek. Okay, there's our antelope that we trained. I did this work with Nancy Erlbeck. Nobody at the Denver Zoo thought we could possibly train antelope. Let me tell you, you got to take it really slow. It takes 10 days to train it to tolerate sliding door opening. So the first day, the door went shh, and it oriented. That's all we did that day. Because when the animal orients, there's actually no biochemical teeter-totter in there that makes a decision. Do I keep seeking or do I throw a big fit now, a big fear response? And that teeter-totter in more modern research has been discovered in drug addiction research. Okay, handling stress is short-term fear stress. Then what about, then you get some animals that are kind of a barren environment, do stereotypies. Recently I went to a feed yard in China. They had bull calves there, Holstein bull calves. One of them was sucking its own testicles. I don't think that was fear in that situation, but they were Holstein. I'm not kidding. He was sucking his own testicles. I am not kidding. And they were doing a lot of, well, you see, we bred that dairy cow to produce. Well, when you breed an animal to produce, you breed an animal to eat. So they go crazy with their mouth. And recently I read some interesting research on feather pecking in hens, and they did some high-speed video on it and found out that the motion that the hen made was the same that you do for foraging. It's actually misplaced foraging behavior. Maybe that's one of the reasons why the high-producing lines have got so much feather pecking. They peck and forage another bird's feathers, and it's pretty disastrous. Okay. And what amenities do we need to give an animal? I don't think we have to put them up in the Ritz. I just got back from Germany, and we're having some discussions about what you have to do to house animals. Yeah, we got to give them decent housing. Yep, and I did see some pigs at a German meatpacking plant. They came in on this truck that was like the Rolls Royce of trucks. Well, hydraulic platforms that go up and down, and no ramps. Yeah, and then they bring in a peer train that was probably homozygous for the stress gene, and it couldn't walk. Okay, you can put that animal on the best truck in the world, and why are we breeding that? Now, there were other spotted animals that got off just fine. They were probably heterozygotes for the stress gene. Well, why are you still breeding animals that are having those kinds of problems? I do a lot of work with the slaughter plants, and one of the big problems I'm seeing now, I'm going to have to fix back at the farm. Cattle with conformation issues in their legs. Cattle that have been fed too much beta agonists, and they're all stiff and sore and don't want to walk. Okay, what are things in housing you might need to give the animal? Well, maybe a nest box, a perch. And the other thing, and Joy and I were talking about this last night, is just full height so it can walk normally. When I went to JS West, they've got the colony cages. The thing that I noticed, first thing I noticed when I walked in there is this bird actually could walk the normal way chickens walk. In a regular battery cage is stooped over. Yeah, you probably need to give them the nest box. Now, this is an interesting old experiment. You got a gerbil. You're living in some kid's bedroom, and all he does is dig all day. So you go, oh, let's give the gerbil more dirt. It wants to dig. You know what? It doesn't want the digging. What it wants is cover. And if it's just got a little bit of dirt, it can't get cover. What it really wants is a hiding place. You give it something to hide, then it stops digging. It doesn't want dirt. It wants to hide from aerial predators. It's an instinctual, hardwired behavior. And they gave them pre-made artificial burrows, like plastic pipe. Then they didn't do any more digging. So you got to figure out what's motivating a behavior. Now, when I took ethology, that was back in the 60s, early 70s, took ethology classes. They didn't want to talk about emotions. Oh, they had stupid things like the hydraulic theory of motivation. What mother would say, twaddle, that was twaddle. I don't even know what that means. I hope it doesn't mean something nasty, but just something that's just complete rubbish. What do you think motivates behavior? These emotional circuits. That's what motivates behavior. You can seek. In fact, why are the drug addiction scientists studying the seeking circuits? Because those are the circuits that turn on when you put the gambling addict in the MRI scanner and you show them picture casino. And the whole circuit just lights right up. Okay, anti-predator behaviors required for survival are probably motivated by fear. Those are some of the things we need to make sure we give the animals. So what do your rodents need? And the places to hide. I went to a seminar where they gave rodents these little nestlet things. And they got very frustrated because they couldn't make a big enough pile of fluff to get under something and hide. All right, here's the old rage cat. You put an electrode down into the thalamus of a cat and instant rage and aggression. This was in my college textbook. That would have been mid-60s. But when we studied this, They didn't want to call it real rage. They called it sham rage or fake rage. Now, about 3 years ago, now the scientists who did this, Hess, Bard, came forward to the neuroscience meeting and said, the reason why we did that is our colleagues would have run us out of town if we'd actually called it real rage. It was real rage. And they did some very clever experiments to show that it was real rage. I was taught that it was fake rage. Now the thing is, there were some other old experiments that were done that showed very clearly it was not fake rage. Because when you turned on the thalamus, the cat would attack a stuffed rat, but it did not attack styrofoam blocks. In other words, like this cat, when it was stimulated, was differentiated between the two different things. And fear and rage come out of two separate brain areas. See, this is one of the advantages of electrode studies. To use computer terminology, if you have a network, you can find out which server on the network's the root. You put them in the MRI scanner, you light up a whole network. Maybe there's 5 or 6 nodes on the network. Which one of those nodes turns on the network? There's no way you can tell with MRI. But with an electrode, you poke down in there, and only one of those nodes turns on the network. And that's the node that's the basis of the emotions. But you'll never get that through an IACUC today. But you got lots and lots and lots of papers here. You don't really need to. Okay, this is a kind of a classical experiment on breeding where Fares and Mills showed that fear and separation distress are separate traits. You could actually breed animals to be the high fear, low separation, or high separation, low fear. You could breed different lines of animals. In fact, this is a chapter in my genetics book, Genetics and the Behavior of Domestic Animals. They measured fear with a tonic immobility test. And that's how they measured what genetic level of fearfulness there were. And the separation distress was measured by, you got a moving sidewalk right here. How long is this little chick going to keep running to keep up close to its mates? And they were able to separate this just with breeding. No biotech here, just plain breeding to show that these were separate traits in the animal. Also, there's been more experiments going on now kind of separating out fear. Okay, tonic immobility is one kind of fear. Another kind of fear is a big startle response. Okay, let's think about it. We're out in some desolate place in the countryside, and you look out the window and you see a UFO out there. Well, when it's far away, I'm going to just stay still. Hope he doesn't find me. If he puts this big ray on me, then maybe I'm going to run. See, that's two ways that you can respond to a threat. You can freeze, you can run, and then when it gets you, you can go into a rage and try to fight it off. Okay, what do dogs need? Well, we got more behavior problems with dogs than we ever had, all the separation distress. When I was a child of the 50s. That was back in the days when children were allowed to go free. In fact, there's a book out now called Free Range Childhood or something like that. And we had free range childhood. The dogs were all free range. They all were socialized. There were no behavior issues. Now we keep them all locked up in the house, and they got lots of problems with separation distress. And there's genetic differences, how well an animal tolerates that. Okay, what's seeking? It's the drive to find new things. So back when Kluver-Bucy did another experiment, nice old experiment here, and they destroyed the amygdala, the monkey responded by wanting to explore everything in the room. Normally, if I brought a monkey in here, he'd be up there on that projector instantly somehow. Because when they get scared in a new place, they go up high. But if they have no fear, then they want to just go out and explore. Okay, I put a clipboard down on the ground, all the cattle came up to it. And the wind blew it, and then the cattle ran away. And it kind of oscillated back and forth between fear and seek. Now, back when I did this, when I hadn't been at CSU very long and I did this, I go, it's like a switch. Well, you know what? In 2008, a scientist named Berridge found the switch that explained how they switch back and forth between fear and seek. Okay, pigs, they like to manipulate stuff. Well, there's an old experiment with the sows in the gestation stall that one of the things that pig really wants is something to chew up. Give her a little bit of straw, then she won't bite the bars. Animals also prefer to chew up. They like new things. See, the thing about something new is attractive if the animal can voluntarily approach it, but it's scary if they're cornered and you just shove it in their face. That's a paradox of novelty. Attractive if you voluntarily approach. I don't know how many people have said to me, my horse was fine at home and he went berserk at the show. Well, there's a lot of stuff that you better get the horse used to before you get to the show. Things like flags, bikes, and balloons. Why don't you just decorate the corrals and let him come up to you, come up to those things. Causes fear when it's suddenly introduced. That's the paradox of novelty. Maybe that's why we like scary movies. Some of that same kind of thing. Okay, this is the research of Berridge, 2009, 2008. And the nucleus accumbens can either go into a fear or seek mode. This would explain the curiously afraid behavior in the cattle. There are genetic factors in this, but there's also early environmental factors, like early stress can have an effect on this. I had an experience that showed exactly how this system worked. I was driving on Interstate 25, minding my business in the right-hand lane. Of course, driving home from the airport, so I'm on there a whole lot. And this idiot in the car passes me. He's got this little low trailer about this far off the ground. And just as he passes me, a big 2x6 board about this long slides off that trailer. And I lock onto it. Seeking's working just as common. This board is now floating. There's actually a mechanism where your visual system will slow down. The board's floating, like this far above the pavement, coming across like this. And I move the car over, I go around to the rumble strip, and do a perfect job of straddling that board. And then the teeter-totter switched. Boom! Swear words, heart pounding, screaming and yelling. You blankety blank, 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 trailer, you know, all kinds of adjectives, and then board and trailer and adjectives. Won't go into what I was saying. And then it took me half an hour to calm down. Now that's exactly how that system works. And I've told this story in a lot of talks. I had a lady come up to me and says, oh, I had that happen, where a car hood flew off a truck hauling wrecked cars. And she had exactly the same thing happen. Okay, and what did they do to stress these poor animals? They played CDs of this guy in the lab to the pregnant moms and to the baby animals. And that made and that is the actual band they used. I went to the method section of the paper, and we looked this up, and I said, Cheryl, I want you to get a picture of what this band looks like. And that's who they played to these animals to stress them really young, to bias that nucleus accumbens more towards fear. Because you see, the teeter-totter can sort of be more the fear side or more the seek side. You know, now the people that are going to be the high seekers, oh, like I watched the Olympics, and then the guy that did all these tumbling, and then I had that guy where his pants nearly fell off, and you know, high seeker doing this snowboarding stuff, you know, low fear, high seeker in that situation. Okay, and what they're trying to do here, and they're using, you know, rodents as a model for humans for drug addiction research, trying to find out how it works. Well, you have seeking something you want. Then if they liked it, they go, I like that. And they're stimulating different parts of the nucleus accumbens, and they're getting different mixtures of these systems. Liking is the opioid system. Wanting's dopamine. Okay, the gambler goes to the casino, blows the paycheck. Yeah, he wanted it, but he's not going to like it very much when his wife finds out he just blew the paycheck. You know, the liking part of it. You see, liking and wanting. They've actually found that there's two different sets of circuits. And this is done in animals. Why would you be doing this in animals if they came from another planet compared to people? But this is all in the neuroscience literature. Because I've been on, you know, because even in 2013, I wrote up a paper. I don't think I'm going to say where I wrote it. But they didn't like the fear word. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I had to Cattle were fearful during handling. I had to change it to agitation. But even in 2013, I'm not going to say where it was, there were some people that didn't want to use that fear word, even though this is in the neuroscience literature. And then you can play around with drugs. An agonist is a drug that enhances. I don't know where they came up with that stupid word. I can understand an antagonist, but agonists are enhancers. Why don't you just say an enhancer? You know, come up with a stupid word there that sounds like agony. And scientists were able to map anatomically distinct wanting and liking parts of the brain. It's hardcore neuroscience. Okay, yes, I ate that big chocolate ice cream, and I'm going, oh man, I don't think I'm going to like the results it's going to have on my waistline. I wanted it, but I didn't really like it all that much. You know, what do animals need? Well, polar bear in the wild, it's an animal that walks. It's a high seeker. It walks. You know, grazing animals graze, so they need to give the polar bear. Well, one of the things they gave the polar bear was a whole bunch of barrels filled with water to different buoyancies, and he has a good time jumping on them. Dogs, they need companions, like for separation distress, and they need seeking activities. In fact, I had a student, Krista Coppola, she did a very nice study, and we've gotten physiology and behavior on separation distress. Okay, a dog comes into the shelter, every other dog. Control, stick it in a cage, leave it there. Experimental, gets to have funsies for an hour playing with Krista doing obedience training and stuff. Test salivary cortisol the next day. The ones that got the human contact, it was lower. But the problem is it went right back up because he didn't keep doing it. Yeah. People ask me about animal shelters. What do they need? I said they need people. Because you can go in an animal shelter that's like a little crummy chain link one. Dog pens are facing each other. Everything's designed wrong. But if they have volunteers come in every day for an hour a day per dog, you don't have all the barking. Yeah, that's the management side of things. Horses, got to be really careful with them to prevent getting fear memories. In my book, Animals in Translation, I talk about preventing fear memories. Animals tend to associate something they were looking at or something they were hearing right the moment something bad happened. Like I knew a horse that was terrified of black hats because during a veterinary procedure, somebody chucked alcohol in his face and he was wearing a black cowboy hat. So a black hat was bad, a white hat was fine. Now if I put the black hat down on the ground, I managed to get the horse to touch it. But as I took it and I brought it closer to my head, it got more and more scary. These memories are specific. There's a very nice experiment by Lerner and Fent, and they found that if you train a horse to tolerate an umbrella opening up suddenly, that does not transfer to an orange tarp. Think about it. A tarp, or a piece of canvas, is a totally different picture than an umbrella. Also, animals differentiate between, like maybe a man on a horse and a person on the ground. So if the cattle are nice and tame to the man on the horse, the flight zone's this big, and to the man on the ground, which they've never seen before, the flight zone's bigger than this room. You see, it's specific. That can get kind of dangerous. Pigs differentiate between a person in the alley and a person going in the pens. And if the first time a person goes in the pens is the day you load them that's squealing super glue. No, they need to have people walking through them. And then you can tell the chicken barn when nobody's walked it. Where maybe they're tame up by the door, then you walk to the other end of it, you know darn well the farmer has not walked through that chicken barn because they're piling up. Animals are very specific in how they store memories because it's sensory-based, not word-based. They don't have words. So it's something they see or something they were hearing right when something bad happened. And they do make some generalizations, like guys with beards are bad, or maybe men are bad in general because they beat the dog up. All right, here's the old neuroscience paper that I downloaded free on a computer that does not have a Colorado State University library access. And I want to commend the Physiological Society putting this stuff up online. And people say to me, well, how can you be eating animals when you know they have emotions? Well, as I mentioned before, they would never have been born. But I feel very strongly We've got to give them a decent life. I'm very concerned about what I call biological system overload. A laying hen where lots of laying hens have osteoporosis and broken bones at the end of life. Dairy cows that are lame. 25% of the dairy cows are lame. There's a point where we're pushing them too hard. People don't seem to see it. You know, and they think they can go in there with biotech and they can override all these systems. I don't think so. Because there's a little problem. It's called physics. It takes energy to make production. It takes energy to make reproduction. And it takes energy for the immune system to work. Let's say with biotech, I make the code for all three. I can't feed it enough to support all that stuff. Now you'll need a feed IV. I don't think that's going to work very well. Well, those are my books. Brad is still out there at the book table. And I'd like to do questions now that I've totally messed up your minds about animals' emotions. Yes, they do have them. But on the other hand, things are different. Sometimes things are wired up different. You know, us lovey-dovey's over the shoulder. That's not lovey-dovey for the dog. And if you go online and you type in kids hugging dogs, you're going to see most of them, the mouth shut like this. That's not totally relaxed. That's totally relaxed right there. You know, Patricia McConnell says you can just tell her what the mouth's doing. If you hug the dog back here, let's say you hug it around here, that doesn't trigger them. You can do it around there. That doesn't trigger the fixed action pattern. It's specific.
You have some questions? Yes, Jeff?
Do animals have memory?
Oh, absolutely they have. Oh, long. There's an old paper by Jeffrey Hudson on memory in sheep, where sheep were put through a handling facility, put into a device to restrain the sheep for full hoof trimming. It's not a very nice device that flipped them upside down and probably really squashed them and hurt them. And the sheep that had gone into that remembered that, and they did not want to go in the next year. A year later, they remember. Now the question I get asked is, the rancher takes a baby calf at 2 days of age, does it remember that? I don't think that young, the memory's formed enough. Older animals definitely remember. I have seen cattle where they've been used in a lab where they've been palpated so much by students and their backsides hurt so much they absolutely would not go in the chute. They just said, we are not going to do this. And there was no way to get them in. No, they remember. They have good memories. Probably, yeah. If you had a good relationship with it, you have to have some. If you had a significant relationship with it, either good or bad, it should remember that. Yeah, they remember that. They've got very, very good memory. Yep. Well, you know, seeing the dairy cattle that know when to come in to be milked. You know, dogs that will know when their master's coming back home, they seem to be right there at the time. We were reading a really sad story about a dog whose master died, and for the rest of the dog's life, it would go to the train station every afternoon and wait for him to come back on the train, and he never came back, but he was there every afternoon. They have a sense of time. You know, now there's certain things. What separates us from the animals is a sheer computer power. Dogs are not going to fly to the moon. You know, that's something they're not going to do. One of the things that we have is we have much greater association cortex. Because dogs will sometimes make stupid associations. Like, they get hit by a car, they might get afraid of the thing they were looking at when they got hit by a car. And we wouldn't do that. You see, that's lack of association, higher order association. You see, because we've got, when you look at the human brain, you slice it right down the middle like that. There's this huge computer power sitting up there. But you take the human, I'd go in the one lab, we'd cut the human brain in half. It was at the University of Illinois. And then I had my pig brain, so I'd cut that in half. You look at the part where the emotions is, unless you're an expert anatomical person, it looks the same. See, that stuff's the same. Now, how it's wired, you know, like a dog, this is not lovey-dovey. Bulls fight like this, horses fight like this. Yeah, you see, that's wired up. There's species-typical things are wired up differently. Okay, right there.
Yeah.
Well, stress, okay, you can have, that's a real general sort of word. You can have fear stress. The question concerned, what's the difference between stress and emotion? All right, the question was, what's the difference between stress and emotion, and how does genetics affect it? Okay, stress, you can have all kinds of stress. You can have heat stress, cold stress, physical exertion stress. You ate something poisonous, a type of stress. Fear stress, stress from separation distress. Now, fear stress and separation distress would be emotional. Heat stress would not be. Or cold stress. Or you ate something and it made you sick. That would not, now the fear stress, or the tendency to be fearful, or the separation distress, yes, that's adjustable genetically. Yeah, there's a lot of research that shows that you can breed a high startle response. One of the best tests for fearfulness is how much does it startle? Sudden stimulus, how much does it startle? And separation distress is okay, you take the animal away from the other animals. In an isolation test, how does it behave? And some animals tolerate isolation better than other animals. See, those are emotional things. But the word stress covers a lot of different things. Then you go back to the old Hans Selye stuff, where they did really nasty things like the Noble Collop stress drum. You basically put a rat in a clothes dryer thing, tumbled it around, and I'm sure it had some fear stress, but you're also going to start injuring it, which would not be fear stress. And they, ACTH and all that stuff gets turned on with lots of different types of stress. But when you get in the brain, stress is not all the same. See, fear stress and separation distress are two different circuits. They're both very negative emotions. Now I go out and I get heat stressed. That's not emotional distress. Or cold stress, or hungry, or so tired. Like I've had jet lag, all I want to do is just sleep. Yeah, stress is an extremely generalized word. Absolutely, genetic selection has an effect on emotion, because fear is an emotion, separation distress is an emotion, and you can genetically select high and low fear animals, and there's tons of literature on that. Tons. I could go on Google, give me a decent desktop, and I could give you half an hour, I could give you 50 abstracts on that. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, that's very well documented. And then the seeking trait, the seek stimulation, that also can be genetically selected for. Let's look at Labrador Retriever. It's the same breed of dog. One's a ball-crazy seeker, and the other's heavy-set lab just wants to lay around the wheelchair. And they're both Labrador Retriever. But that seeking trait's been selected for differently. Oh, absolutely they can be. Well, okay, that's a good question. The question was, okay, how are genetics and emotions linked to productivity? Calm animals, in other words, animals that score, calm scores on things like struggling during restraint, exit speed from the squeeze chute. This is done for cattle, like how fast the cattle run out of the squeeze chute. There's a ton of literature. In fact, my student did one of the first papers on this. Cattle that go crazy when you handle them have lower weight gains. So that's a high fear animal, lower weight gains. That's extremely well documented in cattle. Now, people have been selecting for low fear cattle. And then ranchers are complaining, well, she's got really awful mothering ability. There's always a price. And K-State just did a little study. I think it's just published as a thesis. But I looked it up, I heard about it, and then I looked it up to make sure it was real. And these calm cattle that gain well at the feed yard, guess what? more lung lesions. Maybe they got less resistance to disease. So what that tells me is we shouldn't be selecting for the most calm. We got to select for optimal. Get rid of your nut jobs that are busting down every fence. But you don't want to turn beef cattle into a bunch of Holsteins. Traits are linked in weird ways. Like in animal science, I just got back from animal science meetings. I went to a poster where, yeah, it'd be nice to have all polled Holstein dairy cattle so we don't have to deal with chopping their horns off. But the polled trait is linked to immune system in some weird way. Another poster, and they didn't like it when I called it the death poster when I was in the poster session, I found this poster that showed that high-producing dairy cows was linked to some mortality genetics. That actually makes some sense. Polled and horned, polled and immune, why is that linked? Well, if you read a thing called the ENCODE project, it was published in 2012 in both Science and Nature. You know, only 1% of the DNA actually codes for proteins. What does all the other DNA do? When I was getting my PhD, they used to call it junk DNA. I never believed that. I thought that was junk. Well, they've now found out that the so-called junk DNA, that's the operating system. It tells the coding DNA what to do. So then you start, sequencing a genome, and if they sequence just the exome is coding DNA. So, okay, you find a piece of coding DNA, but the regulatory DNA is physically separated. But you see, to cram that double helix into the sperm and the egg, get folded up. When you fold it up, coding and non-coding DNA go together in some unknown mathematical pattern. That might explain why weird traits are linked. You can go back to Belyev's old experiments with foxes. And the Russians, years ago, wanted to have a nice, tame fur fox that wouldn't bite your hand off. So they started selecting for fur foxes that licked your hand rather than biting it. And after 20 generations, they got a heavy-boned, stocky, black and white border collie fox. Coat color was linked to temperament. I don't know why. Well, they didn't really want border collie colored fur coats. Then they kept selecting more and more and more for tameness, and they ended up with epilepsy. You over-select for single trait, you will wreck your animal. Something nasty's going to happen. There's some stuff going on now with marbling, EPDs, and leg conformation in certain bull lines of cattle. Why are those traits linked? I don't know. Probably has something to do with how folding up the genome. We got to start looking at what's optimal. When you go overboard, something nasty's going to happen. And one thing I'm getting very, very worried about is disease resistance. I sometimes like to play with Google Scholar when I can't sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning. So I found some interesting papers, like the Chinese pig is more resistant to PRRS than the hybrid pig. Dairy cows are more resistant to tuberculosis than some cows in Ethiopia. Yeah, we got to start looking at trade-offs. I guess real productive animals. Right now we have to protect the pigs from disease with biohazard filters. We don't have those in hospitals. Got to be thinking about some of that stuff. What is optimal? Looking more at the whole system. Okay, PEV went in and wiped out 20% of the pig crop. It's not very sustainable. Okay? What I hope I've done is to make you think about stuff. Yvonne wanted me to do my controversial talk rather than just doing something on cattle handling or something on how to set up auditing programs. This book here tells you how to set up auditing programs. Okay, right there. Well, how do I define emotions in terms of what? Well, okay, I'm trying to figure out what the question is. I don't think we want to select cattle for higher order neocortex. Well, you can select animals. Okay, there's a ton of research on selecting animals for different traits like fearfulness, separation distress, and the seeking trait. There's a ton of research on that. And you can genetically select them for high fear, low fear. I mean, let's take the Arab horse. Let's take simple examples. The Arab horse, it's a high seeker and a high fear. Because if you put a flag out in the pasture, in the distant pasture, the Arab's going to be up there first. But if I took a flag and I shoved it in the Arab's stall, it's going to freak out and break its head against the wall. Now, on draft horse, a much calmer horse, yeah, not much is going to happen. Okay, let's say I train animals by tying them up to a stake, which is a method of training I hate. Okay, I tie a Holstein heifer up to a stake, it pulls back, it habituates. You tie a Solaire up to a stake, and you're going to make 25% of those animals unshowable if you do that. They stay scared and they don't get over it. You know, this is where what we do to animals interacts with their genetics. You know, you can, from the Holstein heifer, I tie her up, this is probably not that bad welfare. I tie Angus heifers up, I ruin 10% of those Angus heifers, I won't be able to show them if I do that.
One more question.
Does the DNA ever fold up funny, as in, like, I have a daughter who has a quarter horse, and anytime she gets afraid of something, she immediately goes into seek mode on it, from what you're describing here. I mean, she's afraid of it, she sticks her face in it, which is...
Like what sort of things is she afraid of?
Anything. I mean, anything that she...
Like what? Okay, so this is another thing. When you're trying to troubleshoot an animal behavior problem, I got to have specific information. People will say things to me, well, my horse is crazy. Well, I got to find out what does the horse do to be crazy? And it turned out that this one lady, the horse was only crazy when it was in the cross ties. I said, that's an easy one. You don't need to use cross ties. Just get rid of them. You know, that's an easy one.
Everything. I mean, when this horse gets afraid of something...
Of what? Of what? Give me an example.
Say it looked at that. There's a little shine to that bar there.
Well, you see, that it seems like in some of the... Yeah, but it seems like in some of the wild type animals that high seek and high fear kind of go together in the wild trait. Because think about it, a lot of people that work with horses will say, well, that Arab's really sensitive, it really attends to its environment. Okay, if I'm an animal that's got to avoid getting eaten by predators, I'm high fear, but I'm also high vigilance. I'm going to look at anything I've got to look at anything that might be a potential threat to find out if it is a potential threat. You see, and then when you're working with animals, like when we were working with those antelopes, the first day I moved the door this much and orient. That was all we did that day. Next day I moved it and then it oriented. See, when it orients, okay, the nucleus accumbens going to make a decision. Do I go in fear, splat against the wall mode, or do I keep watching? That little switch will make a decision. And its tendency to flop towards fear or flop towards seek is, affected by genetics. And if you stress the heck out of them, pregnant mom and the really young animals, it tends to bias it more towards the fear side.